Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Clemens. I'm the Digital Humanities and Data Visualization Librarian at the University of Mississippi Libraries. Today, we're going to be talking about creating data visualizations with Tableau. So to begin with, what is Tableau? Simply put, it's an interactive data visualization tool that allows you to analyze raw data. The emphasis here is really on the interactive component. For anyone who might have used something like Excel, for instance, to create basic visualizations such as bar charts and line charts, this software will allow you to create more interactive visualizations. Why would you use Tableau in addition to the interactive component? It's a really easy to use interface. The click, drag, and drop interface is highly accessible, and it doesn't require any sort of coding or programming language, such as chat software like SAS or programmatic options such as R or Python, which do require some more advanced skills. Tableau is highly accessible. Some of the strengths of Tableau, there is a free version, which we will be using today in this demonstration. There also is a paid version, which has a few more features. The interfaces themselves are exactly the same, but the paid version has more file options. It allows you to save locally as opposed to the cloud. And it also has unlimited rows. The public version has a limitation of approximately 15 million rows. And also, because of the nature of saving to the cloud using the public version, you may consider the premium version, what's called Tableau Desktop, if you're using sensitive data and you do not want that to be accessible or visible to the public at large. But again, the ease of use is all the same. The interfaces between the two are identical. And it also, regardless of which version you're using, you can change the data, manipulate the data within the tool without impacting or changing the data from the original source. In other words, you could export an Excel file into Tableau, update that data within Tableau, and the original Excel file would remain the same. With the sort of introduction out of the way, the remainder of this short video will focus on, first of all, getting started with Tableau, and that includes creating an account, and secondly, connecting to the data. We'll be using some sample data provided on the Tableau library guide, which will be linked in this video as well. I'll also include navigating the interface, so an introduction or orientation to Tableau's interface, and then we'll get started creating some of the more common visualizations, such as a bar chart, pie chart, line chart, as well as a GIS map. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to jump out now to my browser. And if you're following along, go ahead and navigate to Tableau Public. And you should see this. You want the Tableau Public : Discover. If you haven't already, the first thing you need to do is navigate over to the sign in option. I currently have an account, but if I did not have an account, I would just need to create an account with Tableau. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. And that'll get us started with Tableau. Okay, so now that you have hopefully created your account, your Tableau account, which is necessary, obviously, to use Tableau, we want to go ahead and start creating visualizations, or at least navigate to the Tableau interface so that we can begin creating visualizations. In order to do that, you're going to want to navigate over to the create icon here. You'll notice a couple of options. The web authoring option is effectively the browser-based version of Tableau Public. And then you can also download the Tableau Desktop Public Edition. So this is, again, the free version of Tableau Public, just in a downloaded form. I'm going to opt to use the downloaded version. That's what I have installed on my machine currently. If you did choose to use the web authoring version, there are very, very minor differences with the interface. But in terms of connecting the data and things of that nature, more or less the same. I'll try to point out some of those differences as they occur to me, but I'm going to use, again, the downloaded version. So I'm going to open Tableau Public on my computer. And this is the kind of the home page where you would get started using Tableau. You can see in my case, I have a couple of projects that are appearing here within this particular interface. These are just some that I've worked on in the past. If you're new to Tableau, you won't see anything here, but if you have created some visualizations in the past, you probably see some of those here, although all of mine are not here Many of them are on the cloud, and I can connect to them and open them within this interface if I wanted. But at this point, I just want to, again, give you kind of a quick introduction to Tableau, beginning with connecting to the data source and the options that you have. To begin with, if you notice over here, you'll see this big connect icon. From this point, the most common file type would be the Microsoft Excel file type, but you also have some other options here. A text file, for instance, which is handy if you do not have Excel, for instance. If you're a Mac user like I am, and you only have numbers, you could convert your numbers file to a text file and then connect it through that option. JSON files, PDF files are also here, as well as spatial files. These would be things like shape files, for instance, for GIS and mapping, and then any kind of like specific statistical file types you would connect there. You could also connect to servers, and this is where things get a little bit different between the free version, the public, the Tableau public version versus the Tableau desktop version, the desktop version being the paid version. You have many more options to connect to server data with the premium version. In this case, though, if you wanted to connect to a data source that you have saved, let's say through Google Drive, you could do that here. At this point, though, we're just going to go ahead and connect to the sample data, which is an Excel file. So I'm going to select Microsoft Excel, and then I'll be shown the options that I have available to me. And notice I'm only able to select naturally Excel files. In my case, I have saved that sample data to my downloads. It's there. And so I'll go ahead and select that. Using the updated sample data, introduction to Tableau. Open it, give it a moment to connect. And this is also something where if you're using the browser-based version, sometimes this connection bit can take a little bit longer than the downloaded the downloaded Tableau public version. Okay, at this point though, we have connected to the data, and I can confirm that by noticing under the connections tab here that we have that same data source that I referenced earlier, the updated sample data. Within this, the next step is, this is an Excel spreadsheet, and if you're familiar with Excel spreadsheets, you'll know that they have the tab options within Excel, right? So you can have multiple spreadsheets open. In this case, this particular sample data only has one tab, and that is the smaller tree census data. And so I would see it here, and it's already populated within this data connection pane. If you had multiple tabs in your data source, you would just need to select one of them and drag it into this view here. And once you've done that, you'll then see the data populated here. This is very much tabular formatted, very similar to the spreadsheet itself, right? And so if you read it from left to right, you'll see the column headings here, which should match your the sample data that we're using, or the headings that you have in your own data. And then you'll also see all of the metadata about each of those headings here, the information within each column. Notice though, something unique to Tableau is that we have these various icons here. These are just the various variables or fields. So in this case, this is Tableau is identifying or analyzing the data that we've connected and providing it with some sort of attribute. In this case, this is a number field, hence the number sign. This is a calendar field. This is a text field. And we should have at least one more, some geo fields here. And you can see those icons which are represented there. Sometimes Tableau is incorrect though, or wrong. And if you ever need to change these, it's just a matter of selecting those particular fields. So in this case, you could change that. If it were a date, for instance, which does sometimes happen, you could change it to a date. So on and so forth. Notice though, in this case, this is actually a date field, so it's got it correct at that time. But occasionally Tableau will recognize those number sequence as numeric values as opposed to dates. So that would be just one example of something you would need to correct. At this point, you can certainly kind of browse through your data and just confirm that all of those various fields are correct. And you can also update the heading names or column headings if you'd like, but you don't have to at this point. Notice also on the left-hand side here, these are just all of the headings in sort of a condensed version if you want to quickly review the field types. All right, so at this point, this is the kind of the data connection page. And from here, you can see that I have a number of tabs already open, but we're going to ignore those, and I'm just going to open a new what's called a worksheet basically in Tableau. So in your case, you'll probably see it very next to the data source, or you should at least see this icon. If you hover over it, you'll see new worksheet. Go ahead and select that, and it's very small, but select it, and you should see sheet 1. At this point, there's a couple of options that we have available. to get started, you can notice, first of all, the data source is here. So in our case, we have these two sample datas have been connected. But just ensure that you're connecting to the same data. Again, going back to the data source itself, smaller tree census, we're good here. Those are just effectively duplicated file types. But here again, just kind of confirming these are all the headings from the previous page, the data page, the connection page, and they all match. If you happen to notice something that needs to be changed, you can certainly change that here, both in the field itself, so from numeric to geo and so on and so forth. But you could also edit the name of the particular headings within this view as well, rename in that option. But that's, again, just all the various options that you have available to begin creating visualizations. Before we do that, though, I want to show you around Tableau very quickly. Okay. First things first, this again is all of the data. This is your data connection window here. This is the data source, and these are all the various fields that we have to begin creating visualizations. This huge open field here is your visualization pane, basically the window. This is where when you start creating visualizations, they will appear here. Up here to the right, you'll see the Show Me tab. If you click that, you'll see all the various visualization options that you have available to you. Notice that only a few are accessible at this point, but if you hover over them, you'll get a sense of what you need to get to make a particular visualization. So in this case, notice at the bottom, there is for stacked bar charts, we would need either one or more dimensions and one or more measures. So what does that mean? So we go back over here to our data. And notice there's this very faint line here. Everything above that line is our dimensions, and everything below that line are measures. Dimensions, simply put, they're basically qualitative values in nature, whereas everything below the measures, everything below this faint line, the measures are quantitative in value. That's the simplest way that I can explain it. And in this case, you will need, again, based on the bar charts, one or more of each of those. For a geo or a map, obviously you're going to need at least one geo field, and then 0 to or more dimensions and 0 to 2 measures to begin making a map, and then so on and so forth. With the dual lines, because of the emphasis on time series data, you're going to need at least one date to be able to populate those. So this just kind of gives you a quick sense of the kind of data that you'll need. And from there, you can kind of get started making visualizations. So at this point, we'll just, again, I'll kind of continue a quick overview, and then I'll highlight some of these things a little bit more naturally, I guess, as we go through the demonstration. So those are the visualization options you have. Just click it to open it, click it again to close it. Now going on this top row here, you'll see several options. One, this what effectively is the Tableau icon. If you click that, you're going to go back to your data source, the connection page itself. So if you wanted to view the reconnect to data or connect to new data, you could do that there quite easily. This is the back button. And this is undo button and a redo button here. This is a relatively new feature, but really nice to have. So for instance, if you were to make a change to your visualization, but then you're not really happy with it, you could obviously undo it and similarly redo it. You can start animations if you have those. This is where you would save your visualization. In this case, again, because we're using the public version, everything that we save will be saved to the cloud. In other words, that account that we created earlier on the website will contain our saved visualizations. This allows you to connect to additional data sources. You see, just as in this example, there are two different data sources, even though these are technically the same. But if you had multiple data sources, you would see all of those there. And then you would just click them individually to see the various fields change. If that makes sense. This is where if you wanted to create a new worksheet, you could click this icon here, but remember, we just clicked the one down here. So you have two options for that. If you wanted to duplicate a particular visualization so that you can maybe make changes, but you don't want to change any from the original visualization, or you're going to make some subtle changes that rather than having to start from scratch, you could just begin with one that's very similar. You can click the duplicate button here. And then finally, if you just want to clear the visualization out and start over, you can click this button. And we'll do some of this, I think, in a moment during the demonstration. Likewise, this allows us to manipulate the X and Y axis, or the columns and rows. So if you wanted to kind of arrange a bar chart, for instance, by in ascending or descending order, or if you wanted to just kind of reorient the X and Y axis you could do that with these icons here. And then there are a few more options here. I think probably those are the most important and ones you're most likely to use on this particular ribbon of options. I guess with the exception of this, if you needed to make some adjustments to the particular visualizations in terms of the size, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Also, I'll just mention briefly, there are a number of other options along the very top here. If you're a Mac user, it looks like this. If you're a Windows user, it's a little more embedded within the actual application, but the options should be the same. And these are just various features of Tableau that I'll cover in a future video, a little more intermediate or advanced Tableau options. But for now, I'm going to stick to the basics just as an introduction. Okay, so from this point, we've covered how to see the visualization options you have and all the various options you have for saving and manipulating your visualizations. In a moment, I'll show you what all of this means in the various cards here. These are marks cards, for instance, and how this is effectively where you would go to change colors, the size of various visualizations, adding text, and so on and so forth. But I'll show you that once we create a visualization. So at this point, let's go ahead and get started. We'll make a simple visualization as a starting point, and then we'll make some minor edits to it. Let's say, for instance, that you're interested in, since this is sample tree data that was collected by volunteers in New York City back in about 2015. It's been almost 10 years ago now. And this is a sampling of that particular data that was collected. But let's say you're interested in the total number of trees broken down by borough in New York City, so the 5 boroughs in the city. We could do that pretty easily. To begin with, obviously, we know since we're interested in the boroughs, that's going to give us a clue that we probably want to have the boroughs included in the visualization. At this point, remember that click, drag, and drop interface. We can click, drag, and drop here within the visualization pane if you choose. If you do that, it's going to automatically populate in either a row or a column, or use that undo button. You could also move it to whichever row or column, your preference. And if you see, if we change that, it will obviously adjust the orientation. We'll have it in the rows for now. And then lastly, undo again, you could just double click, same sort of thing. Those are all the 3 options you have for getting what I'm going to refer to these as pills, these individual fields, for getting them from the data view over here to the actual visualization pane. So at this point, we've got the boroughs there, but this looks very much like, just a spreadsheet form, right? So we're literally in the table, which looks no different than an Excel spreadsheet. The only difference is we don't have any actual numbers. So at this point, we need some sort of numerical value. And so for instance, we may know that intuitively, but if not, we can also click on, let's say, the bar chart, or hover over the horizontal bar chart option here and notice that we need at least one or more measure to generate a bar chart. So what that means is we need to go down here and pull one of these fields or one of these pills into the visualization pane to get started. At this point, I'll note that you'll see several of these at the very bottom. These final 4 have effectively, they were not in the original data. They've been auto-generated by Tableau, and that includes longitude and latitude information because we have those geo variables up here, these fields. But also this is a total count of all of the trees in our data. And you notice it says smaller tree census. It's kind of hard to see. Let me move this over, count. So that's a total count. That's going to be the big clue. And your data will likely have something similar if you have your own data. That basically, if you look for that count in parentheses, that's going to be the same thing. It's effectively quantified the numbers, or sorry, the number of trees in this particular data. So if we drag that up to the columns heading, then we'll see the formation of our very first visualization, in this case, in a bar chart. Now, you may be interested orientation-wise to adjust this. Like I mentioned, you can arrange by ascending, descending order, but you can also flip the X and Y axis. So just with the click of a button, this might be your preference. These are, relatively short enough words that works in this particular orientation, but you may have a preference for this visualization style as well. Like I said, you can arrange ascending, descending. So if you wanted to see them in descending order, you could do that by hovering over, clicking this particular icon. So we've got the visualizations, again, in a basic format here with bar charts. At this point, we can add a couple of other things just as an example. But before I do that, notice if I hover over any of these, this is the sort of the interactive component that I mentioned earlier, right? So hovering over it reveals 2 things. It's confirmation of the actual borough itself, which we already have that information here, but it's still there within what's called the details marks card. So we have Queens as the borough, and then we have the total number of trees that were counted, again, from the sample data in the Queens itself. So 987 trees total were counted in the Queens. At this point, though, let's suppose, for instance, that you were not going to be publishing this on a website. So in other words, it wouldn't be interactive. Instead, you wanted to incorporate this into a research paper. You'd probably want to have some sort of label on this in addition to we already have the boroughs themselves, but maybe the total count. Maybe you want that to be visible for each of these and each of these bars. So if we want to do that, we're going to go down here once again to that small tree census count. And we're not going to reuse the one we already have up here in the visualization, but we're going to just drag another one, a fresh one, so to speak, to the label marks card. And when you hover over it, you'll see it change just ever so slightly to gray. And that's going to now add those labels to your visualization. Let's say also that you want to change the color. So you could do that a couple ways. If you don't like the blue and you want maybe all of your visualization or all your bar charts, sorry, let's say to be orange, you could do that. If you wanted them to have a border to help them a little bit, to stand out a little bit more, to create a little bit more contrast, you could do that. And a couple of other options there as well. Also, though, if you wanted to add if you wanted each of these bar charts to have a unique color, you could also do that. So that's easy enough to do. Once again, we'll come up to the borough this time. Again, we're not pulling the one that we already have in the visualization. We're going to get a fresh one. And we're going to drag it over to the color marks card. And again, you'll see it just ever so faintly change to gray. And now that's going to change each of the two. We retained the borders, but we now have a new unique color for each of the boroughs. So it helps to kind of distinguish your visualization. So that's about it with the initial bar chart. I'll show you kind of quickly how to create a different orientation of a bar chart very quickly. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go over to the new worksheet icon. I'm going to click new worksheet. You'll probably see sheet 2. I'm in sheet 7 again because I already had some visualizations open. And at this point, again, say that we have the visualization now showing the number of trees per borough, but let's say now we wanted to actually focus or the emphasis on the number of each tree, so species type, so the total number of each type of tree counted in the city of New York. And to do that, once again, we're going to go over to our data source itself and select one of these column headings. We won't be the boroughs this time, but instead we're going to be looking for tree name is the one that we're looking for specifically. And so we'll do that, and then we're just going to follow the same steps as before. Again, we could have double-clicked it, drug it here. I'm going to move it down to the row just for my own preference so we can see all those. And then we're just going to select, again, that small tree census data or small tree census count. And that's going to do the same thing, right? So now it's going to populate our visualization using a bar chart. And I will reorient it. A little bit easier to read, at least for now. And there are a couple of things you'll notice. One, notice that we have this null value here. If we wanted to remove that null value, you just simply click on the source itself. So in this case, this is coming from the tree name common field. So we know that we need to go to that field to make the change. So hover over it, and you'll see the drop-down arrow. Click the filter option, uncheck null. Okay, and that's going to remove the null value out. So at this point, again, we can arrange in descending, ascending order. We'll do descending order. And so now we see the trees counted from most to least. And once more, we can add color to our visualization, either by changing the color of every entry uniformly or providing them with individual and unique colors, whatever your preference may be. And so once again, as we hover over, we can see the various color or various information from the detail marks cards. In this case, the Norway maple, there were a total of 369 counted throughout the city, or in other words, all 5 boroughs. And then likewise, similarly, you can add in the label itself by going to the tree label. So we have that information now as well. And I didn't mention it earlier, but if you did want to make the bars skinnier, for instance, you would click that size label. You can make them a little bit bigger as well. And if for some reason you wanted to make the size based on the number of trees, you could do that as well. And we'll do that in a moment, but just keep in mind that you have the options really for all of these to change either uniformly across the board the color or the size, or you can click and drag various points of data here. to visualize it. Quickly, I'll say also with the detail marks card, if you wanted to add additional information here, you could do that. So anything that when I hover over a visualization, you see the tree name, common Norway maple, and the count of smaller tree census. All that information is there automatically. But if I wanted to add, let's say maybe the health for each of these, I could drag that into the detail marks card. That's going to add a little bit of complication to the visualization, but just as a case of the way that works. So we can now see that 195 of those trees, Norway maple trees, are in good health or were marked as good health. 120 were in fair health, and 54 of them were in poor health. But whatever your variable is, it would work the same way. I'm going to undo that, and we'll leave it more or less the same with our burrows. I'm going to go back to sheet. I'm not going to click on sheet 6, but I'm going to right click it, and that's going to bring up this option here. And I want to rename this tab to number of trees. Let's see, tree count, or sorry, trees by, let's see, burrow, and then we'll put this trees. We'll rename sheet 7 or sheet 2 in your case. Trees, oops, trees by name, or you could, whatever, species type, whatever you prefer. But that way that it's easily to distinguish and tell what we're looking at here. Okay, from this point, I'm going to go back to the burrows. And instead of a bar chart, maybe we want this instead to be a pie chart. So to do that, again, simply click on show me. And then in this case, we already have everything we need. So we'll just select the pie chart. And now everything has been transformed from a bar chart to a pie chart. Notice how small it is, though, and we lost all of our details. Well, let's make that a little bit larger to get some of those details back. We'll go up here to this drop-down menu here. The standard view for the pie chart is always small, but we want it to be the entire view. That's going to enlarge it. So at this point, we've still got all the details here, but we could also add those labels back if we wanted to. So for instance, we could add burrow to the label, and then we could also add the count to the label. It dropped those and they converted it from a bar chart to a pie chart. So we've got now the pie chart. We've also got the trees by species type in a bar chart. And now we're going to generate the third common type of visualization. That would be the line, graph, or chart. To begin with, again, if we hover over these, we see pretty clearly that we need at least one date field or variable, and so that would mean that we only have one option, so it would be the created by. So we're going to start there, and we're just going to drag it and drop it into the visualization pane. We're going to navigate up to show me, and then we're going to select the various options or hover over the various line options. We're just going to do the basic lines chart. To generate this, we're going to need at least one measure, as we can see, and then also one date field. Recall that all measures are going to be below the faint gray line and all dimensions will be above it. And then also recall that the fields icons are all going to be here on the left-hand side. And so we need that date field to get started. So let's go ahead and move it here to the columns. Currently, the default is set to year. We're going to actually change that. We'll default the starting point to the month, and then we'll expand it out to the year as well. And then from here, to get this to actually populate the number of counts per day, we'll obviously need that smaller tree census count data, the same one that we've been using for the other visualization. So we've got a nice representation of the various counts across each day. We could mix this up in quite a few different ways. One would be, for instance, if you wanted to see it broken down by burrows, we could drag the burrows into the color marks card, and so that's going to split it up a bit. But yeah, as you can see, they're not particularly helpful because of the way it breaks it up. We want that to actually be a little bit more seamless. So let's undo that. And again, you can play around with it because your data may have different options, but just remember that that's one option that you have. And this is, again, just a very simple example of a date created, but you can also see that the number of counts increased quite a bit as you move into the month of August. So clearly, in this particular sample data set, more trees were counted throughout the month of August of 2015. So we'll stop there with this particular example. We'll rename it. In this case, trees counted by date, just something that we can remember. And then lastly, for the sake of this kind of introductory visual or demonstration, we're going to create one final common visualization, and that would be a GIS map We'll do that next. So to begin with, we're going to create a new worksheet. Once again, we're going to go up to the show me, and then we're going to quickly kind of view what do we need to make a map. So for symbol maps or shaded maps, either way, you're going to need a geo field, and you're going to need at least one measure. And you can add dimensions, similar to I did mention earlier, but even to the line charts and other visualization types, you see that there's 0 or more dimensions. You could certainly add more dimensions to any of these, but it's just saying in order to get started to create a visualization, you need at least in the case of maps, at least one geo field and one measure. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and we'll look. You could drag any of these. We got to identify, first of all, remember, the appropriate fields here. So we need a geo field. We've got 3 options here. We're going to be looking at postcodes, specifically level data. So let's go ahead and double click it. You could drag it and drop it, but I like to double click it for this reason. Well, double click or drag and drop into the viz area. And I'll show you. If you double click, it's going to automatically populate the map. If you drag it into that viz, same thing. But if you pull it over here, sometimes it'll do this sort of number here. So that would require you then just basically to select the viz, and then you would need to incorporate this generated information, the latitude and longitude. It's strictly up to you, whatever you prefer. I've just learned that it's a little bit quicker to double click or drag and drop into the viz pane area. So whatever approach you end up using, you should see this particular visualization to start. But we don't want a symbols map at this point because these are more or less boundaries in terms of postal codes. If we were plotting out specific cities in a state, for instance, the symbols might be more appropriate, but in this case, we want the shaded, what are called polygon maps. And so by selecting the shaded map, you see it changes from symbols or points to shaded area. So we've got that, that's good. And then at this point, let's say that we wanted to see the number of trees counted in each borough. It's a little bit trickier on a map, right? So we could begin, as we always have, right, by dragging and dropping the smaller tree census count. I'm going to double click it. And what's happened here almost by default is that it's, and maybe because I've done it before, but it's dropped it into the color marks card to create essentially a density map. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. But let's say, for instance, your instinct might instead be to take the tree name common and put that into the color marks card. And if you do that, then you're going to see something that looks like this. We're basically going to have a representation of all the different trees there, just based on whichever one is the most commonly occurring. And you can see also we have the null value, so we could remove that out. But again, because of the nature of a map, this is not particularly what we're interested in. This just shows the most common tree. Maybe you are interested in the most common tree per postal code, but let's say you're not. That's not going to be particularly helpful in terms of a map itself. So let's go ahead and click that field or that pill and drag it out into this open area to remove it. Let's say next you might be interested in I don't know, other approaches. Well, if you wanted to see, I suppose, same kind of thing, the different variables here, we could put it by health. And this is going to help you kind of quickly highlight the most common health status of the tree. And many of those are null. So clearly, if we wanted to do that, we could take out the null filter, and that would help. So most of the trees in these areas here are in fair health. This might be helpful if you're trying to identify some issues, for instance, if these areas or these particular postal codes have more trees in poor health than other health types. So that could be a reason to investigate those particular areas, for instance. Once more, though, this is not what we're looking for. So we're going to drag that out into this gray area, the health pill, and then go back to what was sort of the default. We're going to go back to the trusty smaller tree census data and drag it to the color marks card. And then that's going to give us essentially a density map. So this is counting all of the trees per postal code at this point. You see we have a nice auto-generated, more or less legend up here with a lighter the color representing the fewer trees all the way up to this really dark blue, which is a maximum of 106. At this point, we can hover over and see the various counts. So that's great. Like all the others, we could obviously add the labels if we wanted to, although I don't think it's necessary on a map. It does kind of tend to clutter because one thing with the map is you don't want to have too much information. So we'll go ahead and undo that. And we'll leave it like this at this point. So we've got essentially a tree density map, and that's what we're going to call it. We're going to rename that tab tree density map. All right, so at this point, we've created a pie chart, bar chart, line graph chart, and a map. Tableau will allow you now to combine all those visualizations together to set up essentially a filter option that allows your users to filter the visualizations based on whatever variable they're most interested in. I've already mentioned the interactive component, and you've kind of seen illustrations of that with each visualization, right? As you're hovering on them, you can see information. The filter option allows you to essentially to take the next step with that interactivity by setting up those filters for each visualization. And I'll show you what I mean. So where we've been going to create a new worksheet, just next to that, you should see the new dashboard option. Go ahead and click that new dashboard. And at this point, you probably notice a little bit different interface here. For instance, we no longer have those column headings that we saw in the previous worksheets, right? All of this is now gone. And instead, we see all of the visualizations that we've created. So in your case, if you've been following along, you should have these final four: the trees by borough, trees by name, trees counted by date, and tree density map. We can begin by populating one of those. Just click, drag, and drop into that particular pane. And notice all this gray area. For whatever reason, Tableau on many people's computers defaults into this range area, but we want to expand that and effectively to have it fit the screen. So we'll automatically adjust to the size of the screen. And we've got that now worked out. All right, so we've got the pie chart. We're going to go ahead and drop the map in next so that we can get it on the bottom here. So we're going to put it down below and have the pie chart. And from this point, then we'll drag in the bar chart and the line. I'm going to move that. Let me undo that. I want to make it a little bit more evenly distributed. To do that, I'm just going to kind of split right there. Okay, so we've got all three created now. We also have quite a bit of these filter options, which are perfectly fine at this point. But right now, if I click on, let's say, this particular postal code, I can zero in. I can do the same thing on the density map. Click and it highlights only that area. Same with the eyes, etc. So that's nothing new. But if we want this to say, for instance, if I were to click the Manhattan section of the pie, and I would want all of this data to filter then accordingly, or in other words, limit or filter by that particular borough, I need to set up those filters. And so to do that, click on each of these individually, each visualization individually. See when I'm clicking on it, you get all of this kind of options up here. If we want to set up the use as filter on all of these, all four of them. So I'm going to go one by one and select that use as filter, including the map. And so at this point, we've done that. So now if I click on the Manhattan option, all of my data is then filtered by that particular, in this case, the Manhattan borough. Same with Queens. We can go by particular trees. It's very hard to see, obviously, so maybe not ideal, but just for the sake of example, now you can see everything based on the Norway, or is it, the Norway maple. So one of the things that stands out here is obviously the majority of those Norway maples were counted in Queens, and you can also see it kind of populating here on the map as well. So that is kind of a quick summary of how the dashboard works, and an additional feature using that filter option. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to using Tableau to create common visualizations. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My name is Adam Clemens, and my email address is jaclemon@olemiss.edu. Thank you.